The red and blue lights broke through the night like a slap across the sky. Zahara Coleman glanced in her rearview mirror, frowning. She was less than 10 minutes from home, her favorite jazz album playing low, a warm paper bag with takeout resting on the passenger seat. The streets were quiet, too quiet, the kind of quiet that made her skin prickle. Then she saw it, the black and white patrol car behind her, headlights high, engine aggressive, no sirens, just stalking her for the last 6 blocks. She kept her hands at 10 and 2. She was always careful, a civil rights attorney, a daughter of the movement. She had defended clients in police brutality cases more times than she could count. She knew the rules. She helped write some of them. Still, when the lights finally flashed and the patrol car blared its siren, she felt that familiar cold weight drop into her stomach. Don't panic. Don't talk back. Don't resist. She pulled over, rolled down her window halfway, and waited. Footsteps crunched on gravel. Then came the voice, sharp, clipped, commanding. License and registration. Zahara turned slowly, her voice steady. Good evening, officer. May I ask why I was stopped? Officer Mark Dunham didn't answer. He stood there, tall and square, one hand on his belt, the other twitching near his holster. His eyes were hidden behind aviator sunglasses, even though the night had long since fallen. His mouth twisted into a smirk like he smelled something rotten. You didn't signal when you changed lanes, he said finally, flatly. Zahara blinked. I didn't change lanes. I've been going straight since I turned off Jefferson. He leaned in a little. You calling me a liar? No, sir, just clarifying. That was her first mistake. His nostrils flared. Step out of the vehicle. Her heart skipped. Officer, I don't believe I've broken any law. If you could explain. I said out of the vehicle. Now his voice was louder, drawing the attention of 2 pedestrians across the street. They stopped, watched. Zahara exhaled, slowly unbuckled her seatbelt. She opened the door with deliberate calm. Her phone was in her pocket, but she didn't reach for it, not yet. She stood up straight. She was tall, proud, her posture trained from years in courtrooms and underestimating stares. And that, too, seemed to piss him off. You got anything illegal on you? He snapped, circling her like a vulture. No, sir. You resisting? No, sir. But his mind was already made up. He slammed her against the car hood, metal digging into her stomach. She gasped. Her arms were wrenched behind her back with unnecessary force. Stop resisting, he shouted. I'm not. The handcuffs clicked, tight, too tight. Her purse dropped. Her takeout spilled on the asphalt. The pedestrians pulled out their phones. One woman began recording. You're making a mistake, Zahara hissed, trying to stay composed through the growing storm in her chest. You don't know who I am. Dunham bent close to her ear. Don't care. You're just another entitled bitch who thinks she's special. Her blood ran cold. He shoved her into the back of the cruiser. As the door slammed shut, Zahara closed her eyes. Not out of fear, but out of calculation. Because she knew now, this wasn't just about her. This was about all of them. And Officer Dunham? He had just chosen the wrong woman to mess with. The fluorescent lights of the precinct hummed with a low, mechanical indifference, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones and reminds you that you are no longer a citizen. Your property. You're processed. Your prey. Zahara sat on the bench, wrists still cuffed behind her back, shoulders throbbing from how forcefully she'd been shoved into the squad car. Her coat was half off, twisted, the sleeve bunched near her elbow like a tourniquet. Her knees ached. The handcuffs bit into her skin. Across the room, Officer Dunham filled out paperwork with a smirk that didn't fade even when he fumbled the date. Name, Zahara Coleman, black female, mid-30s, non-compliant. He scribbled it like she was a statistic, another line in a column, another number in a system designed to keep people like him in control and people like her silent. But Zahara wasn't silent. Even now, her voice was calm, firm, controlled, but furious. You had no cause to arrest me. Dunham didn't even look up. Keep talking. You'll be resisting again. There are cameras. You know that, don't you? Now he did look up. There was something behind his eyes. Just a flicker, a shadow of recognition, but it vanished as quickly as it came, replaced by contempt. Oh, you one of those know-your-rights types, huh? He chuckled. Well, guess what? Out here, I'm the one with the rights. Another officer, younger, with hesitant eyes, lingered nearby. He didn't laugh. He just watched. Zahara turned her head toward him. What's your name? He blinked, didn't answer. She repeated, slowly. Your name. You were there. You saw everything. Before he could speak, Dunham barked, "Hey, keep walking. Andrews, don't engage." The younger cop moved along like a ghost in a haunted hallway. Zahara was led to the booking desk. A female officer stepped forward and began patting her down. Too rough, too personal. Zahara didn't flinch. But when they reached for her earrings, her hand shot up instinctively. A reflex. "Don't touch me like that." And just like that, it happened. Dunham lunged forward, grabbing her arm, twisting, slamming her against the wall. She's resisting. "No, I'm not," Zahara cried out, her voice shattering the air like a gunshot. But it didn't matter. The room turned into chaos. A third officer rushed in. One of them pulled out a baton, though it wasn't used. Shouts, orders, force. It was all too much, too fast, too brutal. When it was over, Zahara was on the ground. Her blouse was torn at the shoulder, her knees scraped, her lips tight with fury. She looked up slowly, defiantly, through strands of hair that had fallen in her face. A phone was recording from behind the reception glass. A young receptionist, barely 20, had her screen tilted just enough. She didn't smile, didn't blink. Dunham noticed. His jaw clenched. "Delete that." The girl didn't move. "I said delete it." Still, nothing. Zahara's breathing slowed. She smiled, just a little. "You should have kept your hands off me, Officer Dunham," she said, her voice hoarse but unwavering. "You think you've done this before, but you've never done it to me." He stared at her. "You don't even know who I am," she added. And finally, for the first time that night, he hesitated. Just for a second. Then he turned away. The female officer pulled Zahara to her feet. Her wrists were raw, her dignity bruised but intact. As they dragged her toward the holding cell, she saw her reflection in a metal doorframe. Bruised, blood on her cheek, eyes full of fire. They wanted her to feel broken. But all they had done was wake something up. Officer Dunham was already writing his victory in ink. He sat at his desk the next morning, tired but smug, sipping lukewarm coffee, tapping out his report with one hand while scrolling his phone with the other. The official arrest paperwork read like a textbook justification: aggressive suspect, erratic behavior, verbal threats, physical resistance. He even threw in possible narcotics influence for good measure. Lies, every line. But lies were the glue of the system, thin, silent, and nearly impossible to pull apart, especially when written by a white cop against a black woman in a dark alley of bureaucracy. He'd done it before. He always got away with it. The report went through internal processing without a blink. No supervisor questioned it. The desk sergeant signed off. The DA's office, overworked and numb, accepted it at face value and filed misdemeanor charges: obstruction of justice, resisting arrest, and failure to comply. 3 charges, one lie stacked on another. The court date was set in less than 48 hours. Dunham leaned back in his chair. He knew the drill. She'd be shaken, scared, maybe plead out, maybe file a complaint that would be buried and forgotten. Another win, another name faded into the void. But this time was different. On the day of the arraignment, the courtroom buzzed with something unfamiliar. It wasn't packed, but there were eyes, reporters, students, a few people in the gallery with clipboards and quiet, defiant stares. One woman wore a t-shirt with a raised fist. Another held a sign just outside the courthouse: "We see you." Dunham noticed, but shrugged it off. Until she walked in. Zahara. No longer bruised, no longer in handcuffs. She wore a charcoal gray suit, sharp, precise, and commanding. Her hair was pulled back tight. Her face was unreadable, but her eyes burned. She didn't sit with the public defender. She walked straight to the defense table. She stood there, opened her briefcase, and placed a single sheet of paper in front of her. Then she looked directly at the judge. "I will be representing myself." The silence in the room crackled like static. The judge, an aging man with silver temples and thin glasses, blinked twice. "You are the defendant?" "I am Zahara Coleman, attorney, bar number 371009. I will be defending myself in this case." Even the court stenographer stopped typing for a second. Dunham's confidence faltered. His throat dried. He checked the papers in his hand again, looking for anything that would contradict what he was now seeing. But it was all there. Her name, her signature, her silence during booking, not fear, but strategy. The DA looked annoyed. "Miss Coleman, it is unorthodox for—" "I assure you, I'm more than qualified," she interrupted, calm, deadly. and I intend to show, step by step, how this arrest was not only unlawful, but how the department has enabled this officer to target and brutalize civilians unchecked. The judge raised an eyebrow. Miss Coleman, this is not the trial. This is the arraignment. Then let's proceed. Her voice didn't waver once. Dunham shifted in his seat. He suddenly felt hot, heavy. The badge on his chest felt like it was made of molten lead. Zahara didn't glance his way, not once. She entered her plea, not guilty. Then she handed the court clerk a motion, formal, flawless, for immediate discovery, all body cam footage, dash cam, internal communications from the night of the arrest, and Officer Dunham's disciplinary record. The DA's expression changed. He glanced at Dunham. Disciplinary record? Zahara spoke again, never breaking eye contact with the judge. I believe there are over a dozen civilian complaints tied to Officer Dunham in the last 5 years, none of which led to internal review. Murmurs stirred in the gallery. The judge cleared his throat. We will reconvene in 3 weeks for pretrial. This court is adjourned. The gavel hit the block, but it sounded like a thunderclap. Dunham stood quickly and exited through the side door. His palms were sweating. In the hallway, his captain was waiting. You didn't tell me she was a lawyer, the captain hissed. Dunham swallowed. I didn't know. You better fix this before it blows up. Too late. Outside the courthouse, a news van had pulled up. Someone had already printed a flyer with Dunham's face and the words, "Arrested the wrong woman." And Zahara? She walked out calmly, met the cameras with quiet steel, and said only this: we begin in the courtroom, but we won't end there. Let's take a quick pause. If you're watching this, let us know in the comments, where are you tuning in from? Have you ever experienced something similar or seen something like this happen? We'd love to hear your story. And if this kind of content speaks to you, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Now, let's continue. The first ripple didn't start with a headline. It started with a phone. The receptionist, the young woman behind the glass who had quietly filmed Zahara's assault, had posted the video to a private group chat of friends. Nothing public. Just a "can you believe this happened last night?" with shaky footage and a caption that read, "She didn't do anything. He just grabbed her." But someone in that chat wasn't just a friend. She was a journalism student at NYU, and within an hour, the video found its way onto a campus blog titled "You Can't Unsee This." By the time the sun had set, it was viral. No filters, no edits, no audio manipulation. Just Officer Dunham's voice barking, "She's resisting," as Zahara's body was shoved against the wall with violent, unnecessary force. Her cries, her defiance, her composure. And then the still frame, Zahara on the ground, blouse torn, chin raised. The internet did the rest. Within 24 hours, her name was trending, not as a suspect, as a symbol. Hashtag Zahara speaks. Hashtag not your suspect. Hashtag she is the law. Blogs exploded. TikToks dissected the footage frame by frame. Legal experts weighed in. Civil rights attorneys started quoting case law. A podcast episode titled "He Arrested a Lawyer for Walking While Black" reached 300,000 streams in a day. And then the national networks picked it up. CNN, MSNBC, even Fox. They all aired the clip, each spinning it in their own way, but none of them could change what was visible, what was undeniable. The image of Officer Dunham's white hands slamming a black woman into a wall was now seared into public consciousness. Back inside the department, the cracks began to show. Dunham arrived for his shift with a coffee in hand and a fake yawn, pretending like everything was normal. But the moment he stepped into the precinct, the atmosphere had changed. Silence. No jokes. No nods. No mourning. Dunham. Just eyes. Sergeant Morales pulled him aside. "We've got a problem." Dunham shrugged. "What kind of problem?" "You." Morales slapped a file onto the desk, a thick one. "Internal Affairs is opening a review. The footage is all over the damn country. The captain's being called by the mayor's office. Civilian complaints that were closed, they're being reopened. And now they're looking at you." Dunham felt the sweat prickling under his collar. "They always look. Nothing sticks." Dunham felt the sweat prickling under his collar. "They always look. Nothing sticks." Morales didn't smile. Not this time. Behind them, Officer Andrews, the young cop who had hesitated during the arrest, avoided eye contact. He looked torn, like a man standing on a sinking ship who suddenly realized the captain couldn't swim. Later that afternoon, Andrews was summoned to a closed-door meeting with Internal Affairs. And for the first time, he spoke. He told them everything. That Zahara never resisted, that she asked calmly for her rights, that the use of force was unjustified, that Dunham had muttered, "These people think they own the streets now," before pulling her over. His statement shattered the silence that had protected Dunham for years. Meanwhile, Zahara wasn't staying quiet. She held a press conference outside the courthouse. No podium, no microphone, just her, standing in front of a crowd of cameras, with dozens of supporters behind her, lawyers, activists, students, parents, strangers. She raised one photo into the air, the still of her bruised face. "This is what happens," she said, "when the law is twisted into a weapon, when justice becomes fear, when power protects itself, not the people." Reporters shouted questions. She answered only one. "What do you want, Miss Coleman?" Her answer was cold and surgical. "I want the system to feel what I felt when I was thrown to the ground, exposed, vulnerable, and no longer in control." Then she walked away. No further comment. That night, the mayor called an emergency meeting with the chief of police. "Get ahead of this," he ordered. "Suspend him. Distance yourself." "But that'll look like we're giving in. You already gave in the moment you ignored the complaints. Now you're cleaning up blood with a press release." The chief exhaled through clenched teeth. By morning, Officer Dunham was placed on administrative leave. With pay, of course. But to the public, it was a crack, a small one, but real. A signal that the dam was no longer holding. And for Zahara, it was only the beginning. Because she wasn't just seeking personal justice anymore. She was building a case, not just against Dunham, but against everything that allowed him to exist. The courtroom was her battlefield now. And this time, the system was the one on trial. The courtroom was colder than Zahara remembered. It wasn't the temperature, it was the energy, the silence, the sterile hum of overhead lights that buzzed faintly as if trying to distract from the weight in the air. Even the seats groaned quietly as journalists shifted with their notepads, their pens poised like scalpels. The preliminary hearing was supposed to be procedural. But from the moment Zahara stepped into the courtroom, in a deep navy dress suit and fire in her eyes, everyone knew this would be something else. Officer Dunham sat on the other side, in uniform, pressed, polished, a show of order and control, but his jaw clenched every time someone whispered, and his eyes darted nervously when the door opened and closed. He wasn't used to being watched. And now, the world was watching. The judge entered. Cameras weren't allowed inside, but reporters sketched and tweeted every breath, every movement. "Miss Coleman," the judge began after the formalities, "you've motioned for an evidentiary hearing prior to trial, which is your right. I will allow limited questioning of the arresting officer under the conditions outlined." Zahara stood. "Thank you, Your Honor." The clerk swore Dunham in. He raised his right hand stiffly. And then, she began. Her steps toward the witness stand were slow, deliberate, not the pace of intimidation, but of patience, of confidence. She wasn't rushing to attack. She was peeling him apart. "Officer Dunham," she began, her voice calm but resonant, "you stated in your official report that I was aggressive and resisting arrest. Is that correct?" "Yes," he replied, chin high. "You were non-compliant." She nodded slightly. "And yet the body cam footage shows me walking away with a bag of groceries in one hand and my phone in the other. At what point did I become aggressive?" Dunham shifted. "You refused to stop when I asked you to. Was I under arrest at that time?" "No, but I had reasonable suspicion." "For what?" There was a pause. "You fit the description." Zahara tilted her head. "A black woman in business clothes, carrying groceries?" Murmurs rippled through the gallery. The judge banged his gavel. "Order." She continued, "Let's move on. You claimed I made verbal threats. Can you state exactly what those were?" She was confrontational. "She said something about me abusing power." "Is that a threat?" He faltered. "It was the tone." "The tone." Zahara's voice turned icy. "So a black woman questioning your authority is now a threat?" "Objection. Overruled." She pressed on. "You also listed me as under the influence of narcotics in your report. Did you perform a field sobriety test?" "No." "Did I show any symptoms of intoxication?" "No." "So why did you include that in the report?" Silence. Zahara leaned in slightly. "Was it because you assumed that would discredit me later? Because you've used that tactic before?" Dunham's nostrils flared. "I followed protocol." She raised a printed document and handed it to the clerk. "This is a record of Officer Dunham's prior reports over the last 3 years. In 12 separate cases involving black civilians, he used the same language, possible narcotics influence. Not once was a drug test administered. Not once was contraband found. The courtroom stirred again. You have a pattern, Officer Dunham, a pattern of assumptions, a pattern of escalation, a pattern of abuse. Objection. Withdrawn, Zahara said, turning away from the judge without blinking. But the damage was done. Dunham's face reddened. His hands balled into fists. She circled back to the podium. One final question, Officer Dunham. When you slammed me against the wall, tore my blouse, and pressed your knee into my back, did you feel in danger? I followed my training. Then your training is broken, and if your department thinks this is normal, they are complicit. Gasps. Reporters scribbling. The judge struck the gavel again. That's enough for today. But the courtroom didn't quiet. The lie had been exposed, not just through words, but through the posture of the man in uniform, unraveling in real time. Zahara gathered her notes calmly. She didn't look at Dunham again. She didn't need to. The court date was now set. The judge granted full discovery and ruled that the defense could call all 12 prior complainants as witnesses. It was no longer just her word against his. It was the community against the badge. Outside, the protest lines had doubled. There were signs, chants, and tears. But there was also hope, a new kind, focused, legal, armed with names, dates, affidavits. This wasn't just a trial anymore. It was a reckoning. And Zahara? She wasn't fighting for herself. She was opening a door that had been locked for far too long, and she was daring others to walk through it with her. At the precinct, the silence was no longer tense, it was suffocating. No one joked around the coffee machine. No one laughed in the locker room. The usual rhythm of bravado and blue code loyalty had become a funeral march, and Officer Dunham felt it the most. He walked the halls not like a soldier, but like a ghost. Because the uniform didn't protect him anymore. The moment Officer Andrews gave his testimony to Internal Affairs, the dam burst. Zahara's case had set something in motion, something deeper and darker than anyone expected. Old cases, forgotten files, buried complaints. They started to resurface like bloated corpses floating to the top of a poisoned river. At first, the department tried to contain it. The captain gave a half-hearted press statement, "We are committed to transparency and accountability." But no one believed him, because while his lips said accountability, his eyes screamed panic. And then came the leaks. Anonymous officers started to talk. To reporters, to lawyers, to activists. Stories poured out from under the floorboards, stories about Dunham's history of excessive force, his locker room racism, his whispered threats to rookies who hesitated during arrests. He wasn't just a bad apple. He had been the tree. A tree watered by silence and fed by fear. Internal Affairs ramped up its investigation. More officers were called in. Some of them folded quickly, desperate to save their pensions, to escape the fall. Others, hardened men with tight jaws and cold stares, clung to the code. But one by one, even they began to fracture. Because now it wasn't just about Dunham. It was about all of them. Officer Reyes, one of Dunham's closest allies, was suspended after a leaked audio clip revealed him joking about tuning up perps during night shifts. Sergeant Collins, once praised for her leadership under pressure, was caught falsifying time logs for Dunham's patrol reports. And when Officer Mendoza, a quiet, weary man with 20 years under his belt, finally stepped forward, he did it with trembling hands and a broken voice. "I've covered for him," he confessed during a private hearing. "I've stayed quiet. I told myself I was keeping the peace, but the peace was a lie, and people got hurt because I said nothing." Meanwhile, Zahara was watching. She sat in her modest apartment, surrounded by court documents, her laptop open to legal filings and deposition notes. But she also watched the news, the streams, the comment sections. And what she saw wasn't just outrage. It was momentum. Petitions calling for Dunham's arrest were approaching 500,000 signatures. A GoFundMe for other victims of police brutality, launched by a group of black attorneys in Zahara's name, had crossed $300,000 in a week. Young law students reached out to intern for her pro bono. Journalists asked for interviews. Civil rights organizations offered resources. Churches held prayer vigils. Celebrities shared the clip again and again. Zahara had become more than a plaintiff. She was a signal flare in the dark. And the city was no longer ignoring the smoke. One afternoon, Zahara received a letter with no return address. She opened it carefully. Inside was a single line, handwritten in a rushed scrawl. "I'm sorry for what I saw and didn't stop. He scared us all, but you didn't break. Thank you." There was no signature. But she held the paper like a confession, like a piece of the truth, finally spoken, even in the shadows. In a closed-door session the following week, the DA's office made a historic move. They filed criminal charges not only against Dunham for assault, false arrest, and obstruction of justice, but opened a pattern and practice investigation into the department itself. The feds got involved. Civil rights divisions from Washington flew in. It was no longer a local scandal. It was a systemic breach. And the shield, the sacred badge behind which so many had hidden, was now riddled with bullet holes of truth. Dunham's home was vandalized that same week. Racist PIG was spray-painted across his garage in red letters. His neighbors avoided him. His wife had taken their daughter and left town, and when he tried to walk into a bar he used to frequent, the owner pointed to the door and said, "Not here, not anymore." The once untouchable man was unraveling. His lawyers began to panic. They pushed for a settlement, a quiet exit, no trial, no jury, just a check and sealed documents. But Zahara refused. Her reply was short: "We don't settle with corruption, we dismantle it." And so, the trial loomed. Televised, public, a state versus Dunham showdown that would tear through not only a man, but a culture. And in the final scene of the chapter, we return to Zahara in the courtroom, alone, before it all. She stands before the empty bench, places her hands on the cold rail, and closes her eyes. Not to pray, but to prepare. Because the next time this room is full, it won't be whispers and sketches. It will be testimony. It will be judgment. And this time, the badge won't protect him. They came before sunrise. The line outside the courthouse stretched for 3 city blocks: journalists, law students, local elders, ex-cops, victims, survivors, and strangers who had never met Zahara but felt like they knew her now. The trial of Officer Grant Dunham had become a national event. But to Zahara, it was something deeper than headlines or cameras. It was an exorcism, not of one man, but of the silence that allowed him to thrive. The courtroom was packed. The prosecution laid out their case with surgical precision: the body cam footage, the falsified reports, the racial patterns, the abuse of power. They called witnesses who shook as they spoke, mothers who had watched their sons brutalized, store owners who had been bullied, young officers who had been threatened into submission. And then Zahara took the stand. The moment she raised her hand and swore to tell the truth, the room seemed to still. She didn't cry. She didn't raise her voice. She just told the story, every detail, the fear, the concrete, the weight of his knee, the humiliation of being caged like an animal, the hours in holding, the bruises, the silence of watching the world not care. And then she looked directly at the jury. 12 strangers, 12 pieces of a country that had never truly looked at someone like her and said, "We believe you." "I was not his first victim," she said, "but I will make sure I am his last." The defense scrambled. They painted Zahara as dramatic, emotional, biased. They tried to smear her credentials, her activism, her tone. But the room had already chosen who to listen to, because truth doesn't need to shout when it's standing in plain sight. The closing arguments came. The judge gave the final instructions. The jury was dismissed, and the city held its breath for 7 hours. When they returned, the foreman's voice was steady. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Officer Grant Dunham, guilty on all counts." The words landed like thunder. Zahara didn't cry. She exhaled. The courtroom burst into quiet sobs and clenched fists. People hugged strangers. Reporters typed furiously. Some of the jurors themselves teared up. Dunham sat frozen. His lawyer leaned in, whispering something he didn't hear. For once, the badge on his chest didn't protect him. It merely reflected the courtroom lights like a mirror he could no longer avoid. He was handcuffed before the people he used to dominate. And no one flinched. Outside, the crowd erupted, not in cheers, but in solemn applause. It wasn't a party. It was a reckoning. It was release. People held candles. Others held each other. Zahara emerged down the courthouse steps, surrounded by survivors of Dunham's violence and their families. Her posture was tall, her face calm. Reporters shouted questions. Cameras flashed. But she stopped only once, turning to the mic set up by the sidewalk. Her voice was clear. "This was never just about me. It was about what we allow to happen when we think power means immunity. When we treat uniforms like armor and forget that they cover human beings, some good, and some dangerous. The badge should serve the people, and when it doesn't, the people must speak louder than the silence." Then she stepped back and let others speak. The city changed in the weeks that followed. The department was restructured, the captain resigned, officers were retrained, civilian review boards were empowered, a street was renamed for one of the victims who hadn't lived to see this day. And the badge? It didn't disappear. But now it came with accountability. Zahara returned to her work, not with vengeance, but with clarity. And when she walked through her neighborhood, people didn't look away. They looked up. Because they knew her. Not just as the woman who stood up to a corrupt cop, but as the woman who showed them that no voice is too small when it speaks the truth.